In the months leading up to its release, Remember Me began to gather a lot of attention due to its protagonist, Nilin. According to developer Dontnod, many publishers don't like the idea of a female protagonist, and were insistent that the male player demographic of action-oriented video games wouldn't want to play as a woman. This, as well as the promise to dive into a person's memory in order to change their recollection of an event, are what generated a lot of interest in Dontnod's new Cyberpunk franchise. When the game released, however, the scores were middle of the road, and Remember Me took a lot of criticism not only for its combat, but the scant number of memories the player can remix. Response to Nilin in the game's story was anywhere from lukewarm to positive, and ultimately consumers were driven to skip on the game at full price. But Remember Me isn't just a game I believe you can stamp with a 7 out of 10 and move on from. It's not just a copycat action game with a couple nifty touches and a slipshod script of a story. There are a lot of interesting thematic elements here, and a lot of thoroughly planned ideas as well as mechanics that are tight and polished as well as broken. I'm going to dissect every level of this game I can in order to get a more clear picture of just what Remember Me is, what it isn't, and what it could have been. In order to understand Remember Me, you need to understand the setting in which it takes place, a difficult task as most of the information is hidden within secret collectible documents scattered throughout the levels. While it is possible for the player to get by without the information, a lot of the ensuing events and motivations of certain characters will seem nonsensical or even downright hypocritical. The game takes place in the year 2084, and Europe has been torn apart by a civil war brought on by hard economic times and the disasters of climate change in the early 21st century. The French government has seen economic collapse, and Paris itself was utterly destroyed and flooded. In the aftermath of the devastation, it became overrun with criminals and gang organizations. Due to the involvement of major corporation Memrise, the city was rebuilt as Neo Paris. A dam was implemented to control water levels within the flooded city and guard against potential terrorist attacks. The dam also happens to separate the more privileged inner districts from the outer slums. Memrise has thus become a sort of governing corporation, investing in the improvement of the city while simultaneously creating a monopoly of their product, Sensen. Sensen is short for Sensation Engine, a device that everyone in Neo Paris is implanted with at birth. The device has many capabilities, but the primary function is to digitize memory and treat it as a computer file. You can delete memories you'd rather not have, share memories with other people, and even store select memories for later access.
The first night he said to me, "Let's share our memories." I remember I was sort of afraid, but and he smiled and we hit the switch together, and then I felt everything.
I walked with the other children across town until we were outside of Paris. No one fired. The war was over. I don't know if I'll ever find the courage to give these memories to my son. But I'm relieved to know that they are all safe and secure.
Thanks to my Sensen, my husband lives on. Here and here.
This is where a lot of Remember Me's interesting potential comes in. Sensen and the idea of memories are treated in a sort of exaggerated vision of what Google Glass and Facebook could become. People are already putting photo and video of their lives out in the open for everyone to see, and with Google Glass, there's already a lot of discussion concerning the ethics and concerns of privacy after all. Imagine if, instead of discussing the leaking of a sex tape, someone leaked the memory itself, allowing people to feel a sense of intimacy and pleasure from such a shared experience. Or how about the final memories of a well-loved celebrity's violent end as opposed to a video? Memories as evidence in a court of law, or the ability to erase someone's memory and make a witness obsolete in a crucial case. Unfortunately, none of these interesting concepts are really addressed with the exception of one. In a future where you can share memories, people can become addicted to them.
Just need a fix. My last one. Then I'll stop.
Your memory's unraveling. It's loosening a secondhand cyber orgasm. You're 2 steps away from fragmentation.
Anything, man. I just want to remember something happy.
It makes sense. A lot of people seek alcohol or drugs in order to capture an emotional intensity, be it happiness or some exhilarating high. Now you can just fall into memories of happiness, of a couple on their honeymoon skydiving, or a race car driver making that one last hairpin turn to win the race. Any sort of happy or exhilarating memory other than your dreary in comparison life, especially one in which you live in a slum. So while the Sensen is often presented as a commentary on social networks, journal entries have vocabulary suggesting it is treated like a social network, and the developer even admitted that the game's direction was greatly inspired by Facebook, the one facet of Sensen that really plays into the story is memories as a drug. Those who use their Sensen too much, accessing and deleting too many memories, are eventually transformed into leapers. Why or how people become physically altered based on what's going on in their brain, I don't know. The game never properly explains it. All that is known is that too much use of the Sensen device, too much accessing of memories that aren't your own, will eventually drive you insane. They take a drug addict to make them a crazy, wall-climbing, cannibalistic hobo. Memorize and Sensen are also a sort of vision of what a monopoly based on user-generated content, particularly that of people's lives, could look like. During the time the game takes place, the company of Memorize is developing a central server called H3O. It is essentially a cloud server for storing everyone's memories. Whatever you remember, it is automatically uploaded to the centralized server. Think about the possibility that corporations like Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, any of them could essentially own whatever content you put up on their service, that they can do whatever they choose with your photos, videos, or status updates. Even Google could declare that any document you place on Google Drive is theirs if they so desire. Remember Me has the foundation of a really interesting and uniquely relevant cyberpunk adventure. Problem is that the story hardly touches on any of these matters effectively. The game is instead obsessed with what it calls errorists. This group is formed by memory hunters, those able to access another's memory in order to steal, delete, insert, or remix memories, fighting against what they view as Memorize's selfish, manipulative control. Nilin, our protagonist, is the top memory hunter of the game. We never really learn why she joined the errorists or became a memory hunter, not for certain at least. For her own reasons, she seeks the downfall of Memorize and Sensen technology despite being an avid user of it. Edge is the leader of the errorists, a poetic anarchist that sees nothing but corruption and darkness in the middle to upper class of society, yearning to bring it and Memorize down. I'd love to say this is an exaggeration, but the character is an extremist and one that becomes annoying very, very quickly. That is the world of Remember Me, a city whose districts are divided by financial status as much as they are by the waters of climate change and civil war. A city rebuilt through a corporation dealing in memory sharing, deletion, and extraction. A city at war with a group of idealists with a vague motivation or cause. The foundation of combat is assigning specific attack types referred to as pressins to a predetermined button combination. The player only knows a few combos and pressins at the start, simulating all the knowledge Nilin lost when her memories were wiped. Over time, the game unlocks more combinations and pressins to simulate the gradual recovery of Nilin's memory. Each category of pressin has a unique trait: healing, damage, link, and cooldown. Damage is the only one that really focuses on distributing pain to your foes, often making short work of them. Healing does little by way of damage, but recovers Nilin's health. Link will simply enhance the effect of the previous pressin in the combo series. Cooldown is one of the more key attack types as it ties in directly with the S-pressins, Nilin's special abilities in combat. Each S-pressin has a cooldown timer, preventing the player from reactivating the ability immediately. The cooldown pressins reduce this wait time drastically. The further in a combo chain you place a pressin, the greater its effect. This allows some level of customization for the player. Do you want a combo that prioritizes its greater power output to a specific ability such as damage or healing? Or perhaps to just have one long chain dedicated to a single purpose, such as minimizing your cooldown as quickly as possible? Players, for the most part, will have to memorize the different combos in order to be most effective, but fortunately those combos are mostly simple and the game does a decent job illustrating which combination the player is currently executing on the bottom of the screen. You'll know you got it right or wrong based on the feedback provided below, and even if you screw up a combination, Nilin can flow right into the next punch and start a brand new combo. Flow is the key word here, as the combat is designed with the intent that Nilin be able to dance across the battlefield in a much more agile manner than her opponents. Even if the player has to dodge mid-combo, they are able to pick things right back up so long as they are attacking the same foe. Other action games are all about juggling opponents, high combo counters, and studying your enemy's moves carefully, but Remember Me pulls that back and makes it possible for Nilin to leap and shift around the battlefield with ease. As long as you don't get hurt, the music will build to a more energetic, pumped-up crescendo, fueling the player's adrenaline as they bounce from goon to goon. Once Nilin is struck by a foe, the music stops and the screen flickers. The flow is interrupted, as if caught in the euphoria of a concert or dance club, only for the power to suddenly shut down and leave everyone in silence. Remember Me, at its best, is about plunging into the fight and submerging yourself in the endless trance of agile strength and acrobatic brutality. There's certainly room for the combination system to be improved, and in some ways it can distract from the various special abilities Nilin can make use of in each fight, but they aren't the real problem with Remember Me's combat system. The game is just too damn obsessed with swarms of enemies. Nilin is constantly facing off against the scrawny and mutated leapers, and the further you get into the game, the more of them you have to fight at once. Developer Dontnod tries to vary things up a bit with big and brutish leapers and ones that can cloak, but these foes do nothing to address the actual problem with fighting leapers. In fact, they exacerbate those problems. You will have to do your best to manage large numbers that are constantly attacking one after the next, putting more emphasis on leaping away and dodging the hordes than throwing punches into them. This means you'll often find yourself getting 1, maybe 2 strikes into an enemy before being forced to dodge an attack, a leap that will just land Nilin right into the path of another attacking foe. Boss fights and other large encounters are where this really becomes a problem. Most of the boss fights in the game rely on 1 or 2 of Nilin's S-presence to deal damage to the opponent. Normally this is pretty standard game design, giving the player a chance to combine newly acquired skills with older ones, but the player is constantly getting swarmed with mooks in between attacks. This is to make sure the player not only has a chance to use cooldown strikes, but to ensure they have enough energy to release the attack altogether. The only fight where this isn't really a problem is with Kid Christmas, and despite how simple it is, particularly because it's still early in the game, it flows because there's no swarm of goons to interrupt the fight. It's just you and the kid, and the battle takes as much time as it needs to. You get to use your new Fury ability, you have to fight a bit more intelligently, and in the end the day is won. The other boss fights show similar potential, but there aren't enough opportunities between using each ability to make sure you have the energy to unleash a new attack. That, or the game wants to make sure you can decrease the rate of cooldown. What you instead have is a struggle against mooks more than a struggle against that level's boss, each fight taking much longer than it should because you're tediously killing time until you can next unleash the necessary ability. It really is a damn shame because ultimately the Leapers are such a flawed enemy design that they completely overshadow the Saber Forces, the enemies that actually work. They fight much more cautiously and often appear in fewer, more manageable numbers. Sure, it takes more effort to kill them, but you're not spending most of your time leaping away from the fight. Between enemies with riot shields, guards with electrified body armor, ground-pounding robots, and sniping machines, every time you fight the Saber Forces, it's an interesting encounter. This is especially true in the later parts of the game, where all of your S-presents come into their own to make short work of the more difficult foes so that you can pummel the easier ones. A good fight against the Saber Forces doesn't last too long, and while they make for a decent enough challenge, there are always multiple tricks ready to be pulled from your sleeve to keep Nilin on top. The only real missed opportunity in the Saber Forces are the Zorn. At first it seems as if Nilin is supposed to weaken the Zorn's arm joint in order to blow it off, and you'd be right to assume that. But the game then showcases the Zorn restoring its arm and visually undoing the player's progress. In any other game, this means the player is missing a simple trick, a crucial step necessary before they can tear that arm off. But no hint is provided and no other options exist. That's because there are no other options, just keep on busting that arm off until it fails to recover. The problem here is that the player isn't really told that, eventually, that arm will stop recovering. Blow it off once, it heals. Blow it off again, it regenerates once more. The only reason for a player to keep repeating the same failed strategy is stubborn or half-hearted insistence to do so. This ability to regenerate also adds nothing to the fight but to make it longer, artificially boosting the challenge by simply increasing the window in which the player can make a minor mistake. The Zorn is a missed opportunity because it's a unique enemy with some real character. Reduce the length of the fight so that its arm gets blown off the first time, and suddenly you have a creative, memorable, and still intimidating foe that can now be thrown into larger encounters with a variety of smaller enemies. As it is, you only fight the enemy twice, and because it's tedious both times, especially when encountered by itself, this interesting opponent becomes just another tiresome roadblock to progress. Remember Me's best fights are against the Saber Forces. They are when Nilin feels like a real fighter, a capable warrior, and the player is given the most satisfactory opportunities to unleash Nilin's entire arsenal. While fighting the Leapers early on isn't too bad, they represent the game at its worst. Even when hulking Leapers or camouflage ones appear to try and vary things up, the experience is just marred by the irrational and wild beast of an enemy. There is no flow when Leapers are around. They disrupt flow, and while, thematically, I can understand wanting the Leapers to represent an intimidating chaos and disorder primed to overrun the city of Neo-Paris, it just does not work mechanically. I don't feel intimidated by the Leapers, they're too weak to be intimidating. Instead, I just feel annoyed by them. For this and other reasons, Remember Me would have been a better game if Don't Nod just cast them onto the cutting room floor. Before I move on, there is one last aspect of combat I'd like to examine. Like many action games, Remember Me implements a finishing move that allows Nilin to access another person's sensation engine and completely overload it. It's satisfying in that simple, empowering show of dominance that many such sequences boil down to. But what is most interesting is how the overload ends. When Nilin has finished scrambling the enemy's sensen, a burst of 8-bit blocks explode from her victim's head. The red and white colors give it a look of digitized blood and skull as if they're being shot in the back of the head. This violent display, combined with the damage we see it does to a man like Gabriel Trace later in the game, makes for an interesting visual cue into the potential nature of Nilin. Just what kind of character are you playing? Where did her fighting skills come from? Just what is her true nature? Unfortunately, you'll find later on that it doesn't really mean much of anything. The key to appreciating Remember Me is that you'll only spend maybe half of your time in combat. The rest will be spent exploring different parts of Neo-Paris, a wondrously varied and detailed city to behold. I honestly want to give credit to Don't Nod Entertainment in conveying not only a beautiful world, but a mostly believable one in regards to how much time is spent in combat. Nilin may pummel a realism-breaking number of Saber Force members, but the bodies don't pile up into the thousands like other games. Combat is just one of many things that can happen when you step into a room, rather than every room just being a different skin for another fight. For as often as a lot of critics are talking ludonarrative dissonance and complaining about our protagonists being psychopaths, it is important to highlight a game that finds other things for the player to do besides fight. Each map is designed to feel like a real place, kept interesting by Nilin's less than conventional routes through the city. Instead of walking right into a building, Nilin will climb a pipe to access the rooftop, only to sidle along a ledge so that she can reach the street on the other side. This allows you to see every facet of Neo-Paris, making the environment feel that much more developed, that much more lived in. What you can interact with is highlighted by Nilin's ocular implant. Usually its bright orange appearance contrasts well against the background, but the two-dimensional nature of the display means you won't be able to see the highlights at certain angles. Some secret routes and passages can also be discovered just at the edge of the camera's periphery, but there are plenty that simply elude the player from most perspectives. This results in some collectibles and hidden paths being difficult to near impossible to find, especially since some random leaps of faith are often met with the most uncomfortable landing. I suppose part of the issue is the camera. It simply spends too much time trying to anticipate where you're going to want to look, even when you're repeatedly trying to tell it what you really want to see. At the same time, Nilin Control is a bit more true to life, possessing an actual turning radius rather than pulling a 180 spin in the blink of an eye. While during action sequences this isn't so bad, it can make certain aspects of platforming a bit more of a pain. Combine it with the over-busy camera and you'll find yourself in some awkward, problematic moments. In the grand scheme of the game, the camera and controls are merely an occasional nuisance. Otherwise, the navigation works satisfactorily, great even, and in particular is most effective during the fight with Gabriel Trace. The camera is automatically placed behind Nilin as you are forced to run away, with each leap being properly crap. Okay, so it's got its flaws, but damn it! Yes, you will fall to your death by accident here and there, but checkpoints are well placed and, most of the time, the acrobatics function as designed. You see where you want to leap, and you leap there. It actually works better during the fast-paced chase with Gabriel because there's pretty much one single linear path to take. Usually. The game won't be trying to predict which of multiple ledges you're aiming for, a problem that can be experienced during the calm, slower-paced moments of exploration. Just like the camera, Remember Me's efforts to predict what the player wants to see or do is more of an occasional nuisance, rarely impeding on the player experience. Aside from easily jumping from ledge to ledge and climbing an assortment of pipes, chutes, and ladders, the player is also capable of using Nilin's array of combat abilities to explore and unlock hidden rooms and paths of the world. For example, the same glove that allows Nilin to overload someone's brain also overloads digital locks and computers. This is often used to great effect to provide players with the occasional puzzles, provide them hints across treacherous terrain, or to simply expand the action of exploration. These tools also play a key part in obtaining the game's collectibles. While many games just shoehorn items for the player to grab, Don't Nod made sure the different collectibles all provided some purpose, a utility. Scaramecks grant an experience bonus upon discovery. Sat patches upgrade your health, and focus boosts, boost your focus, which is necessary to use more S-Pressins. Lastly are what are titled Nemists, the journal entries that provide all the information and detail about the setting and characters of Remember Me. By giving each collectible item a practical purpose, the player is encouraged to hunt them down, which thus encourages the player to explore and thus use more of their tools and abilities. This also paces the game out better, allowing the player to swell in a brief moment of pride with every item found before jumping back into the excitement of combat. This is where Dontnod's design capabilities truly shine the brightest. Everything simply gels best with the game's exploration, hampered only by minor inconveniences with the camera and control. Many critics were disappointed in the lack of remixes available throughout the game, but honestly, I feel like Remember Me had no more or less than necessary. Not every level concludes with a remix, just as not every level ends with a boss fight. The remixes serve a greater purpose, demonstrating the power of the technology at hand, allowing the player to experience it firsthand, as well as directly involving the player in some of the game's key revelations. But the remixes aren't necessarily interesting to interact with. There's only one solution to each remix, only one way to change someone's memory, with only one set of circumstances required. It is a puzzle only in that the player must think through which items are relevant for the desired result. Now, most puzzles in games aren't all that complex, of course, with Legend of Zelda being a perfect example. Push a block from point A to B, or shoot an arrow at the eye on the wall, and ta-da! But those are all a small number of interactions focused on using all of your tools available in the larger whole of completing a dungeon. With memory remixing, determining which objects are in what binary state is all there is to it. If Remember Me embraced the notion of redefining who we are, or asking if our memories are what define us, then this could have been a perfect opportunity to shift what ending you get, or what personality Nilin has. Provide a simple objective, and allow the player to choose an outcome. They'd still be predetermined, but now the puzzle is no longer which objects are required to fulfill the objective, it becomes which objects will get the desired result. In addition, the game also hints at the ability to sort of zoom into memories within memories, a concept that could make great multi-dimensional puzzles. However, I imagine one of the reasons Dontnod didn't experiment further with this idea are the technical limitations of doing so. Each memory has to load a whole new level, including the one time you get to dive further into a memory remix towards the end. This means zooming in and out will require reloading levels over and over, and that's just implausible. Trying to allow a player to zoom in and out, back and forth of a memory would just require a lot of loading time, and that would just be frustrating for anyone. Memory remixing as it exists is a nice enough prototype to a creative idea, but it's more of a narrative tool than anything else. It keeps the player involved and interacting in much the same way as QuickTime events, but less obvious and without the annoying failure states. If they included any more than they had, then each remix would have lost more of its value and become redundant or tedious. Characters are often introduced well before you actually meet them within the world of Remember Me. Signs and billboards will show us key characters, audio advertisements, news stories. Each of these gives the player a chance to learn a little bit about every character through the game. Scylla Cartier-Wells and Gabriel Trace are perfect examples, each revealed to the player long before they have a key role to play in the story.
Citizens of Neo-Paris, the Leaper threat has been addressed. Thanks to the Reconversion Project, they now live to serve you faithfully.
Chief of Saber Force, Captain Squarejaw Tight Pants Trace, has promised a take-no-prisoners approach to counter this threat to Neo-Paris.
This gradual, slow introduction of the people of Neo-Paris allows the characters of Remember Me to feel more real. They're not just a convenient boss for that level, but are actual movers and shakers within the city with a real sense of presence and agency. That's the intent, at least. Unfortunately, the game is still littered with throwaway characters, such as Kaoru the Architect. While she has a significant place in the construction of Neo-Paris, she really offers nothing to the story. She's just there for the player to steal a quick memory from, one that could have gone to characters such as Madame or Scylla. In fact, give Madame and Scylla a lunch meeting, show that even these more cutthroat, assertive businesswomen have a casual, friendly side, or perhaps show that neither trusts the other fully. It would develop the characters further, and honestly, Madame needs more development. As it stands, she is horrifically two-dimensional, and for a game trying so hard to have a well-developed female protagonist...
And when I've finished with you, you'll think you've always adored me.
No.
Don't fight your desire to worship me.
Man, there are Disney villains with better motivations than Madame has. If you want to make a character whose actions are just manifestations of their selfishness combined with a desire to be loved and accepted, then you better start your list of inspirations with Citizen Kane. But this problem is not exclusive to just Madame. All of Dontnod's efforts to make a believable, multi-dimensional world crumbles because their villains are such irredeemable assholes.
Hello, Nilin. Let's play a little game of you turn yourself in, but I shoot you anyway.
Stop this foolishness and get back to work. Your families are under Saber Force protection, and we have a strict schedule to keep.
Look at her. So eager to snuff out a new era of enlightenment. She would have us continue to live in these dark ages of individualism. Go, my children! Share with her my dream!
If your villains are less nuanced than the ones written by Frank Miller, then you have some major rewrites to do, especially since the game concludes with Charles Cartier-Wells, head of Memorize and creator of the Sense and Technology, whose core motive is to simply wipe away pain from the world. This presents a major juxtaposition. The game tries so hard to get you to believe Memorize is an evil corporation run by evil people, yet the person in charge is someone you're meant to empathize with, a man with good intentions, albeit confused ones. I don't know who was in charge of writing at Don't Nod, and I don't know if there were too many bad demands coming in from publisher Capcom, but half of the characters in Remember Me are frequently wading through a gray area of morality, while so many others are labeled as being definitively bad or definitively good. It feels like someone changed their mind halfway through, or as if there were two different writers with completely different intents in charge of different parts of the game. Perhaps what makes it most frustrating is the character of Edge. He is frequently chirping in your ear about how selfish and evil all of your opponents in this game are.
Find that bitch and toss the rotten apples from her rotten mind.
Behold the privileged few, safe with their little comforts, while others live in suffering, a few meters from their barricade.
No one chooses which side of the firewall to grow up on.
It's not their selfishness that I condemn, sister. It's their eagerness to forget everything that bothers them.
Yet Edge is the one that has you steal codes to the dam around Neo-Paris and then floods the inner district of Saint Michel, killing hundreds and destroying the homes and property of many. Why does he do this? Ultimately so he can tug on Nillen's puppet strings and get her to dance to his suicidal tune. You see, Edge isn't actually a man, he's a machine. A consciousness developed within Memorize's centralized cloud server, and he wants to die. He preaches this great vision of freedom, this great ideal of good, but ultimately he sacrifices the lives of others just so he can have his own wish fulfilled, for Nillen to destroy him. And the game ends with Nillen speaking about Edge as if he's some heroic martyr.
My friend's name was Edge. Born from the sense and abuses, he was the first to understand that we were all floating adrift. Edge died to remind us that some intimate doors are not supposed to be opened, and that suffering, like painful memories, is just part of life.
What am I supposed to think of this game's story, of its characters? Edge is no different than those he would destroy, all of whom are self-centered and disregard the pain of others for their own satisfaction, yet he's treated like a damned hero. Players deserve better writing than this. Remember Me deserves better writing than this. The characters have the potential to reflect the gray areas of morality, how it gets clouded up in perspective and personal experiences. Nillen herself is a character seeking to figure out herself, whether her past actions define who she is, whether she's committing horrible acts or saving the day. All the while, Edge's master plan brings ruin and devastation wherever he leads Nillen. Yet no questions are asked, no philosophies are discussed. Edge is a hero because the writers dictated so, and Scylla, Madame, and Gabriel are evil because Edge dictated so. Those are the characters of Remember Me. Leapers are at the core of Remember Me's story. That is to say, a cyberpunk world built to explore the ethical ramifications of sharing memories, rewriting memories, and even deleting memories, all tied together to cloud computing and concerns over corporate ownership of private information and content. All of that is put on the back burner for the sake of mutated human beings. It may not seem that way since so much of the game relies on the sense-in and the ripple effect of the technology on the populace, but without the Leapers, there is no reason to believe Memorize is an evil corporation. There is no good reason to follow Edge, no way to justify him as a hero. Leapers are created because they essentially go insane off of all the memories within their head. For some reason, this also causes their body to mutate, because of course it does. While this is a side effect of addiction to memory accessing and remixing, Edge views it as the fault of Memorize instead. Scylla is in charge of a program called the Reconversion Project, designed to eliminate the Leaper problem by making the Leapers subservient to Memorize. It's a clear power move, making the mutants an unquestioning, dependent extension of the company's private Saber forces. Naturally, this isn't a cure to the Leaper problem. That's partially because Dr. Quaid, the mad scientist of the game, still doesn't know what exactly causes the Leaper mutation. Aside from memories. So instead, Dr. Quaid gets homeless and outcasts off the streets, the dregs of the society, and actively turns them into Leapers, which is only increasing their numbers and causing them to spread out from the slums. This Saturday morning cartoon of a plot, standard video game story tripe, is why the company memorizes evil, with Charles Cartier Wells being completely oblivious to the various goings-on of his own company. Naturally, there are many more questions to be asked, such as whether Scylla knew Quaid was creating the Leapers or not, but the game is uninterested in them because Memorize is evil and so are its employees. If it weren't for the Leapers, if it weren't for this contrived story about an evil corporation making monsters for selfish gains, Remember Me could be one of the greatest stories in a video game in the past decade, perhaps history of the medium. It has everything there: a lost soul trying to figure out their identity, the murky waters of right and wrong, a deep look into happiness, family, memories. Whether our actions define us, or whether our memories define us. To give an example of what I mean, let's look back at that less significant villain of the game, Kid Christmas. He's an early foe, but perhaps one of the better written ones despite a lack of screen time. He used to be a memory hunter, just like Nilin. However, he turned his efforts legitimate, televising his fights to stop other memory hunters. Edge, in his usual manner, has few kind words to say.
This Kid Christmas. I knew him. He's a memory hunter like me.
He's the shame of your profession. Could have been a genius, but he traded his soul for a fat paycheck.
Yet a closer look at the journal entry on Kid Christmas reveals that he donates a large chunk of his money to less fortunate children, just as he had been growing up. This is the equivalent of an MMA fighter or football star donating tons of cash to low-income neighborhoods and schools like they had gone through when they were younger. Kid Christmas's memories and life have impacted the actions he takes, the decisions he makes, into who he is. Without that history, what would he be? Without those memories as a struggling child, would he be so generous? More so, this sets the stage for Edge to be an unreliable narrator, a deceitful, closed-minded voice. Yet nothing is done with any of this information. Kid Christmas is defeated, and the game proceeds to provide Edge with a soapbox, saying very little about whether the Sensor technology or the H3O cloud server is morally questionable, allowing him to flood the city, and giving the Leapers greater access to slaughter whoever is in their path. Is the Sensor technology or H3O cloud server really morally questionable? Well, we just have to take it on Edge's word. Nilin and Edge smile into the sunset of Neo Paris, a city they destroyed, a city where thousands of innocents lost their homes, and cheerfully says, and they lived happily ever after. I really enjoy playing Remember Me. It's a game I expect to go back to repeatedly, as there's still so much for me to find, still so much to see, and so much combat to master. It manages to mash a variety of genres together while experimenting with some new ideas. It's a lot of fun, and despite how flawed the game is, I absolutely love it. But I absolutely loathe the game's story for all the potential I see flushed down the drain. This could have gone down in gaming history, maybe not when it first came out, but down the line most certainly. Instead, it's just another example of just how easy it is to take a promising idea and smear it with shit. Now it's a mechanically clever title whose story and setting will gradually be forgotten, lost amidst the memories of tighter, cleaner, more carefully stitched together games.
Hurry. This is our last chance to shoot Memorize, right in the brainstem.
Another errand. I'm not some obedient valet, Edge.
And I'm not your conscience, Nilin. You're as free as any other human.
He's an asshole.